Hello and welcome to Veritas Populi, Truth for the People. I'm Dan Meredith and today we have special guest, C. Richard Archie. Today we're going to discuss the Tennessee Constitution. You know, when people serve in the state of Tennessee as legislators, governors, different offices in the state here, they swear an oath to protect and defend not only the U.S. Constitution, but the Constitution of the state of Tennessee. But I would probably wager that if you ask most of these people much about the Constitution of the state of Tennessee, and this also applies to most people in the state, including myself, if you ask these people that hold office how much they know about the Constitution, most of them will probably say they've never read it or they know very little. And that's why today we're going to look at the Constitution, and we have someone here that really knows a lot about the Constitution of the state of Tennessee. Richard Archie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us about your history in studying the Tennessee Constitution, how much you've studied and how long you've been looking into this.
I became extremely interested in the Tennessee Constitution, I would guess, in my time in high school. I had a history instructor there, and we breezed through in the 7th grade. We had a Tennessee history class, and we did very little, if anything, looking at the Tennessee Constitution at that point. When we got in high school and we did an in-depth study of the Union Constitution, I had a copy that my grandmother had given me of the Tennessee Constitution, and I was looking at the relative differences between the two and was a little bit confused as to why there were actually so many things that were in fact different. I was thinking at that point, as you would have schools teach you anymore, that the federal government is the end and be all and the final answer to everything.
Right.
Yeah, but when we got to the 10th Amendment, I can remember this very well. Mr. Bruce was my history instructor, and I said, well, wait a minute, if it says that the states have got control of this thing, how come the federal government then is the final say on everything? And he couldn't give me a good answer, because at that point, nobody questioned that, I don't think.
Right. So the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, yes. And what does that say?
Basically, it says if it is not a power granted to the federal government by the Constitution, nor denied it to the states by the Constitution, it belongs to the states or to the people, powers.
Right.
And it is absolutely necessary, and I try to get this across every time I give a talk on the Constitution. People have rights, governments have power.
Wow.
And so when we talk about, in the 10th Amendment, the powers that are given by the Constitution, they're derived from the will of the people.
That's an important point.
Oh, that's the
powers
yes.
are given by the people to the government. Well, the rights that the people have, who gives them those rights?
My standard answer for that, and the way I was raised and what I firmly believe, is we're given those rights by God.
That's a good answer.
That is, by nature's God. If you go back and read the Declaration of Independence, the guys that penned and formed this nation, which I think were probably dropped off by a spaceship, because that was a really, really bright bunch of people to have the understanding that they did of human nature and what was going to be coming at us from that point. That group of individuals put together, Jefferson, Franklin, Tench Cox, you know, all these guys that wrote this, were very, very astute individuals, and I think they were foresighted. We call them forefathers, but I think they were foresighted in that they knew the things that we were going to be coming up against. And so what they did was they gave us, through their sacrifice and blood and treasure, a republic. I mean, I remember, and everybody who studied this any at all remembers when Franklin came out from the Constitutional Congress and the lady asked him, Dr. Franklin, what do we have? And he said, ma'am, we have a republic.
Right,
if
Mrs.
you
Powell.
can keep it.
Mrs. Powell.
That's correct.
And that's so important, that the people have rights that were given to them by God, a higher power, and then they allow the powers of the government to govern them. And it's important that even in the federal Constitution, which we're not discussing much today, but the federal Constitution, it talks about the right of the free press shall not be infringed. The right of speech, well, where did that come from? The people already had it.
That's correct.
They already had the right to assemble. They already had the right to protect themselves with arms. All of these rights that they already had, the Constitution points out in the Bill of Rights that the government, it doesn't give the people the rights. It talks about the rights they already had,
That's
and
correct.
the government is not to infringe those rights.
That's
it
correct.
doesn't give them to the people. It points out the government does not infringe those rights. And that, in fact, in the preamble and Declaration of Rights of the Tennessee Constitution, it even more points out that the people have these rights given to them by God, and they have a right to implement a government that has no right to take away those rights.
That's correct.
So that's important.
And so, in looking at the 10th Amendment in high school, we look at the fact that we have a United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If you really study that, what that doesn't say is that you have a federal government in charge of everything.
Right.
And so once I understood that, in fact, the states were the keepers of liberty and freedom, we have a right to vote with our feet, we say, in the United States. If you don't like the laws in California, you can pick up and move across the state line and live in Nevada or come to Tennessee. As opposed to what they have in Europe at this point. If you want to immigrate from, say, Great Britain, and you want to move into Germany, you don't just pick up and go. You're not instantly a resident over there like you are in the United States between
You don't
these
become
states.
a German.
That's correct.
You're
You're an expatriate of Great Britain
right.
there. And
living in Germany.
correct.
Yeah.
And so in trying to get my arms around that, I began to really study the Tennessee Constitution at that point. And I was amazed that nobody understood what this document, and a little later we will talk about the fact that when Andrew Jackson carried the Tennessee Constitution in its barest form, in its first iteration, to Washington and shared it with Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson made the statement that it was the least imperfect and most Republican of all the state documents that he had seen up until that point. And you have to understand that they didn't have the Republican and Democrat parties at that point. So he wasn't making a statement as to party affiliation. What we had was a republic at that point.
Right.
And they understood the difference between a democracy. I mean, Benjamin Franklin called democracy mob rule, which is what it is. If 50 plus 1% of the people decide to take the property and lives of the other 49.9%, they can do so in a democracy.
Right.
We have, in this document that's before you and what we're going to talk about today, a roadmap that is supposed to be the guide for everything that happens with respect to the governance of the people. The people are supposed to be in charge of that, and the folks that sit in the General Assembly and the governor and the Supreme Court are supposed to serve us. That's the way it's supposed to be. They're supposed to be, if they understood the oath and obligation that they all raise their hand and take, which we will talk about a little further down the road. If they understood that, a lot of the things that happen right now in our state legislature would not be going on, but they don't care. And as long as the general population doesn't understand what's in the Tennessee Constitution and the powers that they have, it will continue. It's just that simple.
Well, that's what I'm hoping, that people will watch this show as we disseminate it out through YouTube and the internet and through watching this on public access TV. Do you think that maybe some of the reason that the people who are mentioned in this document and mentioned in the federal Constitution, the people don't get interested in this because they feel like, well, the federal government overrules everything in the state, so there's no use in looking at the Tennessee Constitution. And they are so powerful, we can't do anything. And then they feel like the state, they overrule things and they do whatever they want to, so we don't have any power. You feel like the people have just sort of like given up?
Yeah, I really do. And one of the quotes that I always use when I talk about Pericles said this centuries ago: just because you don't take an interest in politics does not mean that politics will not take an interest in you. And what we have now is so few people feel like that they can be effective, that they have any say whatsoever in our governance. They tend to not be involved at all. And that's what career politicians, who we never intended to have in the first place.
Right.
You know, people were supposed to serve. That's the reason they called it serve. They were supposed to leave their farms, their homes, their silver businesses, whatever they had. They were supposed to go when they were elected and served for a time and then go back home, and then somebody else came in the next term and did it.
Right.
There was never an intent for a career politician. We have, in the state level, we got guys that have been there for 60 years.
Right.
You know, they got elected when they were 30 and they're well into their 70s and 80s now. We allow these things, and the reason that we do is because the term, he brings the bacon home, okay? The hardest job in the entire United States to lose is an elected senator on the federal level. If you go back and look at it originally, what was supposed to happen, the death of the United States occurred when they passed the 17th Amendment.
Right.
When the state legislators no longer appointed the senators to go serve as statesmen at the federal level. The People's House were supposed to be elected by the rabble. That's all of us together, okay?
Right.
We were supposed to have our voice there. Then the states were supposed to be able to appoint 2 senators to go in the upper chamber to modify the People's House. All bills at that point of having anything to do with money were supposed to arise in the House. We've changed that somewhat. But in the 17th Amendment, what we did was we allowed a popular vote for senators. We changed it up, and now that's the hardest guy to get rid of in the entire United States as an elected senator, because he brings so much money back to the states. If he does the will of the affluent and big business in each state, he's going to get all of the donations.
Right.
The lobbyists are going to put the money to him, and you just absolutely cannot get rid of them. And so we have given up our responsibility under the state constitution. And now, on the current state, it's Article 1, Section 23, that says that we're supposed to instruct our representatives. If you go to Article 1, Section 1, which talks about the powers of the people, it says that all government is in our hands, that we're responsible for it.
Right.
Article 1, Section 2 says, and if you're not involved, that you're being slavish, that you're a coward, that you're not taking your responsibilities and duties correctly, and the people that are going to suffer from that are your children.
Right.
So I think it's important that people understand the gradual change of that least imperfect and most Republican of all documents across the centuries, basically, into what we have right now.
Sure. And people like you are an inspiration to me, because you're not a politician. You don't hold public office.
I do
but
not.
How many times a week, a month, a year are you down at the General Assembly talking to these legislators?
During session, I'm there at least once a month during session, or more.
So you're not a politician, but you're down there knocking on doors, talking to people. If you walk into these people's office, they say, "Hey, Richard, how you doing?"
That's correct.
They know you because you're down there. You're not a politician. You're just an average citizen, but you go down there and talk to them. And I'd like our viewers to know that's what we can do, and that's what we should be doing. So if you're out there and you're a farmer, you work at McDonald's, you work at the MAPCO, you're a stay-at-home mom, you can go down there and walk in there and go through the metal detector and knock on the door, say, "Hey, I live in your district, and here's what I think." And that's what we ought to be doing. But we think we can't. We think that we have no power. But we do. We can go down there, and we should be going down there.
We absolutely should. The parable that I tell on this is, if most people were like me when they first got married, they were pretty destitute. I was going to school, and I was working a couple of part-time jobs, and the living arrangements that I had at that time were not the best. And so you would come in after working and going to school all week, and what meager amount of money you had to go to the grocery store, you'd come in, it would be late on a Friday afternoon, you would turn your lights on, the cockroaches would leave the middle of the room and run to the corners, because when you turn a light on, the cockroaches will flee. I like the individual citizen going to Nashville and walking through the doors of Legislative Plaza and going to see their elected representative to turning that light on. They operate with impunity if you do not go and instruct your representatives. The one thing that I tell people, it's within our power. It is your job. It is what the founders intended for us to do, was to manage these folks. We don't work for them. They work for us. And if you read your Constitution, it will tell you how it's supposed to be done, but it says first, rattle out of the box. If you read Article 1, Section 1 now, it says that all power is inherent in the people, and all government are comprised for their good and safety and for their happiness. And at all times, If the people don't like what's going on in Nashville, they have the right and the power to change that.
Right.
The only way that we can change it is to be involved and to go up there and talk to these folks and let them know that we know the rules of the road. If you haven't read them, like a lot of them haven't, I had a conversation with a sitting legislator, and we were talking about a balanced budget he had put up on his Facebook page last year. Tennessee legislature does a great job at balancing the budget, and we were at a meeting, and I said, doesn't the Constitution tell you have to do that? He said, well, no. And I said, well, yes, it does. Evidently, you haven't read it. And he said, well, if we didn't, what do you think would happen? Do you think you would arrest us all? I said, what does your obligation to the Constitution, what did you raise your hand? It says that you will honor and obey this Constitution to my good and not to yours. The problem that we have is that we do not hold them accountable.
Right.
We don't hold ourselves accountable because we don't instruct our representatives. It is time, if we want a better government, for us to be better citizens, which means that we have to honor our obligation that is espoused in that document.
Excellent. And so viewers there, it doesn't matter who you are. And sometimes people think, well, I'm nobody, I'm unimportant. You are important. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're a doctor or a lawyer, you're no more important than the person that just made the bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich that I got for one of our crew members at Hardee's. It doesn't matter who you are. You are an equal vote to anybody else. And I like the way you put it, that we instruct these people. So it doesn't matter who you are. You can go down to the General Assembly and instruct the person that is voted into office. Tell them, here's your job, and here's what I think you ought to do. So that's good.
We're given our right in Article 1, Section 23 to peaceably assemble. We're given the right to petition our government for redress of grievances by demonstration and remonstrance. And I have a lot of times I'll put up behind me when I give a speech, I put the word up, remonstrate, so that people understand. It doesn't say demonstrate, it says remonstrate. What it means is that you're going to espouse a certain belief, and then you're going to expound upon those beliefs. You're going to give credible information that will prove the point that you're talking about. And that's what we're charged in our Constitution with doing with our representatives. We need to be informed. We have to then have discussions on the information that we have garnered ourselves with those folks, so that they then know, hey, I can't pull the wool over this man's eyes, and he's going to go back and talk. People have to understand, when our Constitution was founded, the two places where things were discussed at that point were churches and taverns. Okay? What we don't do anymore, because government has decided they want to keep churches out of it, they've made them tax exempt as long as they don't delve into politics. Okay?
So that's interesting that back when it was founded, they discussed things at taverns and churches, and now the federal government says if you discuss politics in churches, then we will send somebody to you and shut you down.
Correct.
Or start taxing you.
That's correct. And so one of the worst things that has happened to us here is that tax exempt status for churches. Because we just passed a very important date in April 19th when the shot heard around the world was fired, and at the Lexington Bridge, the first shot fired was by a Presbyterian minister. And basically what he told the folks that were with him, the Minutemen that were with him, he said, don't start anything, but stand your ground and don't take anything. And those guys were all in. And you heard me say a while ago, by sacrifice of blood and treasure, that's how we have arrived at the republic that we have now. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, none of those guys discussed these things with the British. They did not negotiate with them. We fought them hand to hand. We shot and killed them so that this experiment, this republic, was born out of a bloody revolution. We don't teach that in school anymore. Everybody thinks that you got to have a safe place, that you need to talk it out. This thing that happened the other day in England, when they blew up the people leaving the concert over there, and then another one of the very important Hollywood types over here said, we just, we need to have no borders. We don't need to have any rules. We just need to hug it out. Yeah.
Love them.
That's ridiculous.
You can't love these people.
If you read the Declaration of Independence, what it talks about, we have suffered all these things, and we've done all that we could. We've entreated, we have followed your rules, and you have taken our sons, you've taken our money without a representation, and we refuse to put up with that anymore. That were the type of people that wrote the Tennessee Constitution.
Yeah.
And again, the fact that it was the least imperfect and most Republican of all the documents at that time that Thomas Jefferson had seen, they literally walked it across the street to the Congress. The Federalists fought against it because they didn't want that rabble from the West out there at that time involved as a state, but they in fact did allow the admission on June 1st of 1796 of the state of Tennessee without a plebiscite. We didn't have a vote to ratify the Constitution. They liked it so well in Washington that they admitted us at that point with the 5 candidates from each of the 11 counties that put it together. We're the only state that ever had that where you didn't have to go back and have a vote to be admitted into the Union. And so I think that's important. We have a really, really good document. And what it did, the original one, had the governor being a very weak individual. He didn't have veto power.
Really?
You know, there wasn't any line item veto in that. The legislature itself, the people's representatives that were elected, had the power. And with the representatives being elected every 2 years, you couldn't let that thing go for long. If you didn't know what the people wanted, then they would in fact turn around and elect new people, and so you would change the direction it was going. The court system at that point, I mean, you had the basic 3 divisions in the 1796, but again, the courts had more power than the governor did at that point. The legislature had the majority of the power, and that was because those were directly related every 2 years to the people. Now, senators were a little bit different at that time. They had a 2-year term originally. It was later changed in a different iteration to 4 years and then staggered. And that's a good thing, because what that does is it tends to not give any one group of individuals the power to move things along just the way they wanted to. By staggering that, we modified the ability of one group of individuals to take place. I think it's important that we understand in this first conversation that we're having about the Constitution that from 1796 to 1834, there were no changes, literally.
So yeah, the Constitution we have today isn't the same as
It is not.
1792.
No, we
went through to 1834.
34. We had a constitutional convention. We changed it, and you have to understand that that was pretty much right before the Civil War. And so what they did was they made sure that slave owners had more rights at that point. There wasn't anything really good that came out of that. Article 1, Section 26 that we see now, at that point changed from the citizens have the right to keep and bear arms to the white citizens have a right to keep and bear arms. It then was changed. The next big change came in 1870 after the Civil War.
So at that point, there were black citizens and white citizens.
That is correct.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
They outlawed black citizens, not just slaves, but black citizens from keeping and bearing arms?
No. It was just free men. If you were a free black individual in the state of Tennessee, you could bear arms.
So they
said free. Well, what they did at that point was free white men. You're correct.
Okay.
In 1834, they said the free white men can bear arms. In 1870, which was the next major change, they added a codicil in to 26 that said the citizens of the state shall have the right to keep and bear arms. However, the legislature shall have power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with a view to prevent crime. And people need to understand that the individuals in charge at the end of the Civil War of our state legislature who called for the Constitutional Convention and the people that were elected were all Democrats and ex-Confederates. In 1865, we had a short constitutional convention that basically disenfranchised all Confederates and didn't allow them to vote. That was changed in 1870 back again.
There weren't too many people here that weren't Confederates.
That's correct.
So basically they disenfranchised most of the population.
That's correct.
They can no longer vote in 1865.
Right.
And so 1870 they tried to sort of fix that. Otherwise, there were no Southerners that could vote anymore.
That's correct.
Okay.
So in 1870, we have basically what we see now. Now, there have been a number of different state constitutional conventions, 1853, then 59. The last one was in 1965. Okay. And various things, I mean, and finally, I think it was it 47, and I'm not sure. It took that long before it was okay in Tennessee to have interracial marriage. So we've moved across a lot of different things, but basically our Constitution as it sits right now is still the same as it was in 1870. We've had fewer major changes to our Constitution than a number of other states have. The problem of it is we don't have a lot of people who understand what's in the document.
Right.
They don't want to spend the time to look at it and understand that the power of government rests in the hands of the general population. We expect that the people that we elect and send to Nashville are going to have the ability to direct our lives. And we are failing in our fiduciary responsibility to our children and our grandchildren to be involved so that we can, in fact, manage the government of Tennessee as our forefathers intended it to be.
Wow. This is extremely interesting. We've got about a minute and a half left. We intend to do a series on this, just depends on how long I can talk and you can talk. But this has been great, talking about the history of the Tennessee Constitution. The people of Tennessee need to know about this. We're not only ruled by the U.S. Constitution, we live under the rule of the Tennessee Constitution also.
That is
and it's
correct.
not all these penny-ante laws that the legislature passes, but the Constitution is the basis for all of them. Because if they pass a law that's unconstitutional, it's not valid. So it's good that we do this. We are going to continue on with another in the series here, and we'll follow on and we'll get into some of the meat of the Constitution, talk a little bit more about the history, and we're glad you're here, Richard. This is a great thing. I hope our audience is enjoying this, and appreciate it. Do you have any closing words in about 20 seconds?
Well, my point is you can go online several different places and get a copy of the Tennessee Constitution, or you can talk to your elected representatives. They have a copy in their office. You can either get the blue book or you can get a small copy, and I would suggest that everybody needs to have and read that Constitution.
Great. Good opportunity to talk to your representative, ask them for this.
Correct.
Appreciate everyone listening and watching. See the next episode as we continue and talk more. Thank you for watching.